A number of years ago, I was presenting a workshop at a conference, and as I began to speak, I tripped over my words, and immediately I had a shame attack. I began obsessing about how awful my misstep was. I was terrified that everybody out there was judging me as harshly as I was judging myself, and I felt enormously foolish. Many of you know this experience where we can go from calm and quickly flip into major degrees of stress and worry. Heat was flooding me, my heart was racing, cortisol and adrenaline were shooting like geysers in my brain, making my body shake just when I wanted to be steady. Somehow, I got through this talk. I don't really know how, but it happened. The second day of this conference, my work partner Beth and I got together and we're talking about the night before, and I began telling her about how I told my husband how badly I had messed up. And then I noticed that she was staring at me blankly and then said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And I realized at that moment that I was so under the spell of my inner critic that I never even checked out my perception with her. She was in the room. She would have known whether or not I had messed up as badly as I thought I had messed up. That's the way the inner critic works. It doesn't have any questions. It's no ifs, ands, or buts. It just says what it says with this certainty, this authoritative voice, no questions, no doubts, no way of interpreting it other than how it interprets it. So we looked at each other and said, how does this happen? How can you be confident and certain about what you're doing and out of nowhere be emotionally hijacked by these intense levels of fear, insecurity, and doubt? And what we began to realize is, well, you can't really protect yourself from that. The only thing you could do is get to know the way that this emotional brain of ours works, the way that it exaggerates how important something is, the way that it predicts these awful, horrible things that are going to happen as a result of what you've done, and the way in which it intensely criticizes, judges, blames, and shames us. And so that as we get to know the way that our emotional brain works, we can get to know when it's speaking up, when it's doing its thing, because the neurochemicals that it produces are so powerful that it's going to get our bodies shaking, it's going to get our bodies heated up and get our hearts racing really fast. What we've also learned is that we can't think our way out of this, that because there's such a physical connection here, that between our brain and our belief systems and the feelings that we end up having, that the reality is we actually have to look at our bodies and start doing breathing to calm our breath down, which gets our neurochemicals slowing down in their production. When our production of neurochemicals are slower, we can then think more reasonably. We can then question things and become more reasonable in how we're assessing it. So how does all this happen? Why does it all happen? Well, way back when on the savannah, we were up against four-legged creatures. We didn't have claws and we didn't have teeth that we could defend ourselves with. We had a brain. And in particular, we had this emotional brain that's in the back of the brain. And that's what's responsible for our fight, flight, and freeze system. That's what got us to be able to notice sounds and be able to smell and be able to at some points stop in our tracks or at other times flee as fast as we can. Well, today we're not up against four-legged creatures. We're up against two-legged creatures. We're up against the fear of human beings and what people are going to think of us and what they're going to do as a result of what they think about us. So we got to get smart about this because that's our only way out of this. That's the only way that we can manage this stress and protect our resilience and confidence at any given moment. We have to get understanding that all of us have this built in. If you think about what happens with parents training kids to be safe, they don't speak to kids in really gentle, calm, compassionate voices when they're trying to train us to not run out into the street or not touch hot stoves. They're talking to us in more harsh tones of voice. They're saying things like, "Don't, you better not. it's going to be really, really bad if you do that. And what we do as kids is we imitate those tones of voice. And we speak to ourselves with those tones of voice so that by 4 years old, we've got a hard wiring track in our brain that has that harsh voice speaking to us to scare us and to keep us safe. Well, what we do with that gives rise to the inner critic. And that inner critic is our best guide initially, because we don't really have the ability to understand how things actually work with people. We just make up stories, and the inner critic blames and shames us as a way of being able to explain things. So it tells us that when our mom isn't paying attention to us, that we must be too needy and we're doing something wrong. And when we're not getting picked to join in a group, it tells us that we must be too awkward and too ugly because otherwise they would be picking us. And that when somebody isn't inviting us to a party, it's because we must be too needy and too selfish. Otherwise, they would be picking us and inviting us to their party. Well, these also aren't really base stories, but the inner worrier joins in with the inner critic. And the inner worrier gets us worrying, right? That's the heart racing. That's all those cortisol chemicals and adrenaline chemicals that are getting us to be fearful that these stories are actually true. So what do we do about this? Well, it's kind of like what we now do with email. We all have learned in 2016 that we can't take our emails all seriously, that we have to develop a skeptical eye. We have to begin slowing down and looking at our emails and questioning whether these are really credible. Otherwise, what happens? We get scammed. And when we get scammed, we get a virus. We get hurt. And it takes a long time to have to repair as a result of that virus. So it's kind of like that with our inner critic and our inner worrier. We need an inner coach. We need our inner coaching voice that helps us to notice when we're getting scammed by the stories that our inner critic and our inner worrier are creating. We need it to notice when fiction's getting created and help us to separate out the fact from the fiction. We need us to help us put things in perspective and to not take things so personally, to not write a story because we're trying to explain something that we may not have an explanation for. We need to be able to pause and slow down and notice this, which means we have to practice, because many of us have, rather than notice our inner critic speak and our inner worrier speak, we've tried to do things like not notice, not hear it. And that doesn't help us. The brain actually keeps having these thoughts even if we tune out of it. So it's best if we tune in. It's best if we start to notice what our inner critic and what our inner worrier are saying. We begin to pause, kind of like using a remote control, where we pause, put it on mute, take a deep breath in order to calm down the body, and then question the credibility of what our critic and what our worrier are saying to us. Because when we do that, we can actually protect our ability to stay calm, our ability to act with courage, and our ability to be resilient and carry forth. Thank you.